By now, you've probably seen the news that Virginia's Supreme Court struck down that state's voter-approved congressional maps. Maps that were meant to counter Republican redistricting elsewhere. Maps that voters voted on themselves recently. If you saw that news and screamed into your pillow, or maybe screamed into this street this morning, or your neighbor, your office mate, you are not alone. It is absolutely infuriating that Republicans have engineered this election for their own advantage, that they are eliminating congressional seats that have long represented majority black communities, that they are erasing representation for majority black communities. It is maddening that Democrats' attempts to counter that scheme have faced such challenges, while the Supreme Court has paved the way for Republicans to go further. But it's also important to remember that none of this means Republicans will hold on to power this November. The Republican Party still has to run on their disastrous record. Everything I just mentioned and so much more. Remember the big ugly bill? And voter enthusiasm is still on the side of Democrats, who have won a slew of off-year and special elections since Trump took office. If all of their efforts are successful, Republicans could pick up as many as 19 House seats from redistricting, while Democrats are still expected to pick up as many as 6. That means if everything goes their way, Republicans could give themselves a 13-seat advantage heading into this November. In 2018, the last time there was a midterm referendum on Donald Trump, Democrats picked up 41 seats. And Donald Trump is more unpopular now than he was then. Democrats can still win back the House this November. That is clear. What's also clear is that Democrats cannot just focus on winning back the House. Because in order to counter Republican redistricting, Democrats are going to have to keep fighting to redraw congressional maps after this November. And in order to do that, they're going to need to win control of state legislatures this November and protect the ones they have. The fight for a fair democracy is just the beginning. And it's going to run through state governments across the country. And it's going to take a lot of energy and organizing in this election and beyond. So where does it start? And what happens next? Joining me now are two of the smartest political minds I know. They have won elections. They have been in every room there is about strategy and communications and ads and all of it. Dan Pfeiffer was a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. He's now, of course, a co-host of Pod Save America. And Quentin Fowlkes was the deputy campaign manager for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, former campaign manager for Raphael Warnock's successful Senate campaign in Georgia. And Politico recently described him as the strategist who beat the money machine after his work on Juliana Stratton's Senate campaign in Illinois. So that's a lot of campaigns between the two of you. I think, I just said this, and I know you wrote something this morning too, Dan. When I saw the news this morning, I did want to punch the wall. And I think that probably is how a lot of people out there felt, or worse, or scream, or all those things. And there's clearly a lot that has happened over the last 8 days that is maddening, infuriating, and it's reshaping, of course, the political dynamics. And there are a lot of questions about the longer-term impact. We'll talk about that. But let me just start with the more immediate one, which is where do you stand on Democrats' chances of retaking the House this November, the challenges, and what the path looks like?
Yeah, I think Democrats were, prior to today, and certainly prior to the Supreme Court decision last week, overwhelming favorites to take the House. Right now, I think they are still favorites to take the House. It is we have a larger hurdle to overcome. But we still are well positioned. Donald Trump's still incredibly unpopular. The political environment cannot be better for Democrats. As you mentioned, there's a massive enthusiasm advantage for Democrats. And the Republicans, their best case scenario is unlikely to happen, right? Even if with the old maps in Virginia, Democrats will almost certainly pick up one seat in the 2nd district and have a very good shot at picking up another seat in the 1st district. In Florida, where they try to add these 4 seats, it's not a guarantee Republicans win all 4 of those seats. Alabama wants to change their map, but they are under a court order preventing them from doing so they have to go to court. Mississippi wants to, they already had their primaries. That's going to cause legal challenges. South Carolina has it. So I think it's going to end up somewhere, not the worst case scenario, but Democrats are still well positioned, and we certainly should double down and keep fighting because we can do this.
What do you think, Quentin? What does this change? How does this change the forecast much? And where do you think is the best opportunity here as we look ahead?
Look, I echo everything that Dan said. I also believe that, we should look at this as an opportunity. Inherently, when you break up these Democratic districts that Republicans are trying to do, clearly we would love to have our districts and not have Republicans try to change the rules. But we also have to look at the momentum that Democrats had before all this started because of the unpopularity of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And we should invest in those districts. Inherently, when you break up these districts, you make the surrounding districts that are Republican held now a little bit more Democratic. and we should look at those areas to invest. I think that we shouldn't sort of take our eye off the ball in regards to, the gerrymandering efforts. And I really think that there's probably only one place left in the country that could really do something in regards to the map, and that's Maryland. I think the Democratic Party should really look deep inwards and make sure that we all recognize that this is much bigger than one state and do everything we can. And so if there is a shot in Maryland, we should take it. I'm not into name checking people, but there is a pathway to maybe do something there. But we have to continue to invest. I mean, right now, Americans are seeing a president that's more interested in being a geologist than being the president of the United States. And I think that's an advantage for us. And so I think our path, as Dan said, remains clear as it is. Even with the original maps in Virginia, we have seats 1, 2, and 5 that are still in play for us. And then around the country by taking advantage of the gains that Democrats have made. And so we have to continue that work and make sure we're on track come this November.
Let me ask you, Quentin. I mean, one of the things about, say, Senator Warnock's campaign, which you ran, so you know this better than I do, is he showed up in places that surprised people. And he turned out voters in places that I think surprised strategists, right? I'm curious about what you think. I mean, people see this, it feels demoralizing, but there is also anger, I think, that is going on in voters' souls right now. As you think about voter turnout and getting people inspired and engaged, what is the right strategy and the best strategy if you're running a campaign that's impacted by what we're seeing happen in states that are being gerrymandered right now?
Yeah, look, I think that I've always been a believer that you have to go places where people don't think that you can win, and especially in certain races, particularly statewide races, it's easier to do that because even if you lose an area, 80-20 instead of 90-10, just because you go there, it actually plays into the overall scheme. But right now, I don't believe that there's a place that Democrats can't go in the country and talk to voters, because no matter how they draw these maps in any state, the underlying fact remains clear, which is that Americans are dissatisfied with Donald Trump and the Republican Party because of the lack of doing anything that they promised that they were going to do when they sent them there. And I also think that, we have to make sure that we're continuing to speak about the things that actually matter and understand that we're moving from special elections and primary elections that are upcoming this summer to a more general election electorate. And that is going to change the calculus of people. It would be a disservice for the Democratic Party to go out and just think that gerrymandering and this conversation around democracy is going to be the argument that wins. If you knock on 100 doors in this country, maybe 5 or 6 people might say democracy or gerrymandering. The majority of them are going to say, I'm worried about paying my light bill. I'm worried about how much money I'm making at my job. I'm worried about child care, health care. And so as long as we stay focused on the message at hand and the advantage that the Republicans and Donald Trump are giving us for their lack of accomplishments under his leadership, I think the Democrats are going to be just fine. And we should be saying that in districts that are R+5, R+7, all the way up to the districts that we feel safe in, because that is the underlying issue at hand. And that is why Democrats have these advantages going into the midterm elections.
Dan, one of the things this shines a light on for me is just the importance of state legislatures. I think we know that, we've learned that. That's something you've talked about. You all inform people out on Pod Save America about that all the time. Talk a little bit about the importance of those races for people out there who want to tune in. They're trying to inform themselves. Where should they be focused? What should they be paying attention to? And why does that matter so much moving forward?
Sure. Because of the Supreme Court decision, we are now in a world of perpetual redistricting. This is not something we do once every 10 years. Every single cycle, there is the opportunity to redraw the maps in a way that is more favorable, and the risk that the other side will take power and do the same. And the people who draw the maps are state legislatures and governors. And we must elect them. We must give Democratic governors majorities to draw that. We must put pressure on Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures to fight fire with fire. There is a bunch of states, New York, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Oregon, Colorado, and others, that in 2028 we can redraw the maps and net as many seats as we could potentially lose from the Supreme Court decision last week. But what's only going to happen is if people elect Democrats who commit to doing that, and then once the Democrats are in office, we put real grassroots pressure on them that anything short of fighting fire with fire is unacceptable.